Hey, I wanted to tell you about something that you're going to see in your email inbox here in the next few days, and we will put a link to this in the a description of today's podcast. But we are giving you a chance to give us some feedback about the podcast. We want to know how we can better meet your needs, the things that you're looking for, the things that you want from this podcast. When you listen or when you watch, what are you after? And so there's a link to a survey in the comment section or in the description here of this podcast. You also get one in your email inbox. We would like to hear from you to tell us a little bit about what you think, how often you listen, what are you listening for, and how we can make this better. Please give us that feedback, and we'll do our best to shape this into the exact tool that you need to help improve your walk with Christ. Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading, then we examine a single relevant question that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Jay Rivenbark, and we're looking at a passage from Leviticus chapter 4. This week we're going to look at some insights about sin. And the culture we live in under the new covenant makes it difficult for us to understand this sacrificial system of animals. But in the Old Testament, the importance of it was designed to do several things. So the most common sacrifice was the burnt offering, and it was designed to reunite the sinner with God. It was the most expensive sacrifice that was made, and the priest couldn't eat any part of this sacrifice. Leviticus chapter 4 deals specifically with the sin offering, and which is better understood as a purification offering. And some things about it. It was given less frequently, less valuable animals were used. In fact, there was this sliding scale of sacrificial value allowed on whether a person who had committed the sin was a high priest or an elder of Israel or just an ordinary person. And the value of the sacrifice is not emphasized, but the pollution of the tabernacle was emphasized. And so this is the crucial element here to understand in the purification offering. See, God had called Israel to be his holy people, and he promised that his presence would dwell with them. When a person sinned, it didn't just defile the individual and broke their relationship with God, but in some sense, it polluted the land. More importantly, the sin of an individual polluted the tabernacle. The tabernacle was the place where God's presence dwelled. And it seems that the further into the tabernacle a person could go, the further inside the tabernacle that animal blood had to be applied in order for it to be cleansed. So in the case of the sin of the high priest or the sin of the entire nation, blood had to be sprinkled before the inner curtain of the sanctuary and on the altar of incense. The priests also had to touch the horns of the altar of incense with blood, and a young bull had to be sacrificed. If an elder of Israel sinned, blood had to be applied to the altar of burnt offerings, the brazen altar that is, which was outside the sanctuary. And if a common person sinned, blood had to be applied to the altar of burnt offerings. A female goat or sheep could be sacrificed. So when we think about this, are there some lessons that we can learn and make application to for ourselves? You see, I think all of us understand how sin defiles a person, but we should also consider how it defiles places that belong to God. Sin doesn't pollute because of the power of sin. Rather, because God is holy, any place that is designated as his place must remain pure. And when a person who functions in one of God's holy places sins, it affects how we function in those places. So think about areas that we have dedicated as belonging to God. Obviously, churches would be that. Schools, government buildings, our homes. We do dedication services for our homes. And so, Jay, I want to talk about maybe today this how sin might defile something besides the person. Do you think that sin defiles particular places, that it still defiles particular places?
I think absolutely it does. As you were reading through and making those points, my mind was running to some of modern crime shows, detective type shows, that wherever a person goes and whatever you touch or come in contact with, you leave a part of you there. It literally, it's often called touch DNA, which very small, minute things, but you leave there. You leave an imprint, an impression. You leave something there, and so when sin is present and active in our life, yeah, I don't see any way around it not impacting places where we spend time at. You mentioned a few of them: the church, schools, homes, government, and the list goes on and on.
How do you think sin affects the church? Not, and when I say the church, I mean the building, not just the big C church, but how does sin affect the church?
I don't see it as you pull up and all of a sudden there's a gargoyle coming out of the window crawling out. Although there might be some places
Right.
you might could find something that hideous, but I think it impacts the place in that if sin is rampant, if it's left unchecked, if it's unrepentant, if it's undealt with, the place, rather than being a place of love and care and the place that houses the presence of God, becomes distant and cold. I think it's part of the reason why a lot of people have, quote, bad experiences at church, because sin has touched it, the place. It's impacted it. And rather than having the experience of being overwhelmed at the presence of God and being in awe of Him, they see man and His manifestations, and we experience people rather than the presence of God. I think has a significant impact.
What about things like government or government buildings? Or we'll talk about your house in a minute.
Talking about my house. Yeah, I think even with that, I had written down in here government. I put /DC. Because what takes place in government buildings often reflects the sin of humanity, our sin and rebellion against God. And I'm not talking about difference of opinion on the issue. I'm talking about things that are blatantly, clearly defined in Scripture that are right or wrong. Where and when government decides we're going to do different or contrary to that, it has an impact. And sadly, it's not just the place where sin is influenced there, but in that case, it goes out literally not only across the country, but across the world, has implications from it.
What about your home? I'm curious, what kind of things defile a home?
I think things like unforgiveness, resentment, bitterness. In this passage of Leviticus 4, and we certainly encourage people to go back and read it in its entirety, it talks about when you become aware of, whether you did it intentionally or unintentionally, but when you become aware of, it changes the dynamics. It changes the responsibility that we have to respond to it. And I think in the home, once we become aware of problems that we don't deal with, it influences the place. It can be a happy place or an unhappy place. It can be a place of grace and forgiveness and creativity, or it can be just the opposite. And so sin has a lot of implications on the home.
I left some music playing at the house, some worship music, a few days back. And Barbara said, "Are you going to leave that while we leave?" I said, "I think I am today." I said, because there are spiritual battles that are happening in my home that I don't mean like right now more than any other time. There are always spiritual battles happening in the home. And what doesn't hurt for us to let because when you think about all the things we watch on TV or on our phones, whether we like that or not, it's released into
it certainly
the
is.
atmosphere of where we are.
But you're right, and it has implications. It has impact. I too have on occasions played music of that nature, and I have talked with people that were struggling at home with thoughts, feelings, emotions, fear, anxiety, and oftentimes have said, start practicing these things. Replace there may be some things you need to give up, walk away from, but there's some things you need to put in place, such as the music, that help usher in the presence of God, because it matters.
Have you ever been anywhere that you knew the spirits weren't right? There was whether somebody, I would say the place was defiled, if that's how you want to say it. Have you ever been anywhere like that? Can you describe it without?
Well, it's like a stronghold. This presence of evil or wickedness, and it's hard to describe if you've not experienced it, and you're just like internally, this is not good. This is not the place I want to be. I don't want to spend no time here. I don't care how good it looks, how good it sounds. Just don't want no part of that. Yes, at places, and there have been occasions, not all the time, not very often, but there have been occasions when I have come in contact with individuals of that same way. That you just like, this is not good.
Something ain't right.
Something is way off. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had that experience in places. Sometimes I can't figure out what it is, so I think you and I recently were having a conversation, or I ended up in your conversation or something, talking about a place in Waco, Texas that I had visited. And it just was
felt bad,
eerie. Yeah, and I don't know whether it was because I knew what had happened there, but it just like when I drove on and when I left, it was like it came and it went.
Yeah.
Right. So it was just different. I can't explain.
Yeah.
More often than not, it's going to be an individual where I go, something ain't sitting quite right with me here. And, I don't know what it is. And there's some things I can spot.
Right.
Some things I can't. I have gone to one particular country, which I won't name. And when I landed, I was like,
just felt it.
This, you could feel the spiritual oppression. It was the sin of a few was affecting all because of things they were allowing to happen.
Yeah, I think this whole passage where he talks about sin defiling the tabernacle. I mean, that's the place of worship. That is the quote, what we would say is the house of God, equivalent to the local church. And to realize that sins in our life impact even the house of God.
Sure.
Which I'm convinced there are times when we come in and gather corporately, we go through and we sing and we do our thing, and we don't leave any different, really. And I'm convinced oftentimes it's because the place has been defiled.
Either the place has been defiled or we've been defiled and we brought it in with us.
Well, that's what I mean. It's been defiled through us, and the failure to acknowledge, address that, becomes very problematic.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around the book of Leviticus.